some questions like.
What did you do when you were a little kid?
Yeah. So let's just go around the room here, and we'll start with Brady. Go ahead, bud.
That's lovely. What did you do when you were a little kid?
What did you do when you were a little kid? What did you like to do?
Besides work.
Yeah.
Well, I was a little older than you, and we lived down by the railroad tracks. And in those days, they used coal. You've seen chunks of coal, I'm sure.
It's little black pieces of junk.
Yeah.
And you put it in the fire.
Right. And that's what they used to heat the water to make the steam, so the steam locomotives,
Makes
the
the
engines,
train go.
could pull the train. One day I was down there, and the train was going by not too fast, but there was an old hobo, a bum. You know what they are?
Kind of like a homeless person?
The homeless people we have nowadays. And he was running to try to catch hold of the train because he wanted to go where the train was going, I guess, up to the next city. And he fell, and the train cut off his toes on one foot.
Oh.
It was kind of bad.
Educational.
So I called an ambulance and took him to the hospital.
That was where, up in Ogden?
In Ogden. I was 8 or 9.
Oh.
I'd never heard that story before.
Hey, we'll all learn something new.
What you do, Grandma?
When I was living in Ogden, I was only 4 when we moved from Ogden. The only thing I remember doing for fun was going for rides with my Aunt Sue and Uncle Ray in their car. We didn't have a car. And they took me to visit some places that were quite far away. We went to Malad, Idaho once, I know, from Ogden. And my sister will never forgive me for I got to go see Al Jolson in the name of that first talking movie. And I was only 3 or 4, and she always thought that was unfair because I don't remember going.
That is real unfair, huh?
and she was 4 years older, and so she remembered. But I suppose they went on a school afternoon or something when she couldn't go, and I wasn't in school yet, and she was.
So, you lived in Ogden? I didn't know that.
I was born in Ogden.
Well, it's worth
Did you
a
ever
solid.
live there at the same time?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
neat.
But not, I mean, we lived real close to where the temple is now. We used to go to church in the tabernacle that's on the temple square there in Ogden.
We, as I say, we lived down there by the railroad tracks, and it wasn't the best part of town. There were kids that lived in with families around there, and one of them was the Stanger family. That fellow from Salt Lake that wanted to, well, he's in the family line, but wanted to get names to do, for them to do, you know, in the temple, was named Stanger. I don't know whether he was part of that family or not. Well, the kids would be my age now, and he was quite a bit younger anyway. They were pretty mean kids. And every day they would chase me to school. And then they would chase me home. And if they caught me, then I had to fight one of the gang. And if they left it at that, just fighting one, well, I could beat any one of them. But as soon as they saw me licking the one I was fighting, why, 3 or 4 more would gang up and I'd get beaten up. But I figured out a way to get even. We had chickens, and one was a great big Rhode Island red rooster. And he was mean. Boy, you go in the chicken pen, and he was right after you. He'd peck you. And on the feet of the roosters, they have spurs. And his were about this long, and they're just like daggers, needles. And they jump and stick you with those. So I would entice one of the gang members in there. That entice means to coax him to come into the chicken yard with me to do something, maybe gather the eggs or whatever. And that old rooster would get him. Boy, he'd get him good. So that's how I got even with some of the gang.
When we moved from Ogden, when I was 4, we moved to Vallejo. That's when my father first started to work for the Navy as a civil service machinist. And it was in 1928, 29. And we went by railroad because we still didn't have a car. And I think I can remember some of that railroad because it took a whole day and night, you know, in those days to go by train. After we got to Vallejo, I still wasn't old enough to go to school, and my sister did go to school, and so my folks chose a house that was close to an elementary school for her to go. And I don't remember much about living in that house, except I remember we had rose bushes, and I used to sing songs to the roses because I didn't have any friends to play with that lived close. And one day I was doing my chores, helping with the dishes, and I was putting away the dishes, and the glasses went in the dining room, and I had both arms loaded like this, and I fell. And I got a cut here. In those days, you didn't go to the doctor and get stitches, so I've got a fair-sized scar. And the only other thing I clearly remember about living there was I was out in the front, probably playing hopscotch, and a fire engine went by. And I was so terrified, I didn't know what to do. And I was almost not able to run, so I just sat down hard on the sidewalk until they went by. So they won't hit me, I'm on the sidewalk.
Those were days when people were poor. Most everybody was poor, and we were about the poorest. We didn't have many toys. My Uncle Russell, who would take tours of people in different parts of the world, and for Christmas, well, he'd bring us back some toys, and those are about the only ones we ever got. We played with things like, we'd get old car tires and roll them up and down the street, and bang into each other with them and stuff. It wasn't a very pleasant childhood, so I don't remember. I guess I don't want to remember much of it.
When did you move to California?
When I was 9, we moved to Oregon. And
How come you went there?
Dad got a job in a lumber mill.
What did he do in Ogden? Work at the railroad?
No, he was in foundry where they cast big metal things, and he worked in there. Then he had they let him go, and he got this job up in Vernonia in Oregon. And we lived there for several years. I don't remember an awful lot about that, except I had a 22 and I'd do some hunting, and I wanted to do some fishing, like a lot of good steelhead fishing up there, but my dad would go and catch some, but he'd never teach me how.
So why did you move to California from Oregon then?
That job petered out, and my dad got a job in the Navy Yard in Vallejo. And so we moved down there when we moved from Vernonia to Portland. I started high school there, and then from Portland we moved to Vallejo when I was 17.
Tell us the story about how you used to read a book when you were herding the cow.
Yeah, we had a cow most every place. We didn't at Ogden or in Vallejo, but I'd herd the cow. So we didn't have land. We just had a house and a little lot. Well, it wasn't as big as yours. And cows need a lot of grass. So I would herd the cow along the roadways, along the sides where there was quite a bit of grass, and the cow would eat that grass, so we'd get milk. And I liked to read. Even then, I liked to read a lot. I think it was probably an escape. I don't want to disillusion your kids about my childhood, but it wasn't very pleasant. You'll see why in just a minute. Well, I'd get so caught up in the story in the book, so engrossed, that I wasn't watching the cow, and the cow would get in the people's corn and their gardens, and boy, oh
Little boy Blue, huh?
Then my dad would whip me. One time he took after me with a big club, and another time an iron pipe. I got so, well, I was a pretty good runner before we ever left Ogden, staying away from all those kids. And I got so I could really run fast.
So what did you do in Vallejo? You were how old when you moved to Vallejo? Oh, wait, you moved to Hawaii. When did you go to Hawaii?
When we moved to Vallejo in 1929, and if you've heard of the crash and depression, that's when it hit, was in 29. And my dad lost his job on Mare Island, and he found one over in San Francisco area, and we moved to a place called South San Francisco. Excuse me. And that's where I started kindergarten. And that was one of the pleasant things that happened to me, was there was a guard, he was a policeman, that watched the crossing where I had to go across the street, a busy street, to get to the school. And he used to, out of all the kids in the crowd, he used to pick me up and carry me across the road every day. I've got a picture of him carrying me.
Oh, really?
But that's also where I got the measles. And the tooth that should be right there came in right after the measles, and it came in brown. And my dad said I had a measly tooth. And they took me to the dentist, and he pulled it. So I have one front tooth on the bottom instead of two.
Huh.
But we didn't. I don't think we lived there too long because I started kindergarten there, and I started the first grade in San Francisco. Wherever it was Dad was working, had to lay a lot of people off, and Dad couldn't find another job, and Mare Island wasn't hiring again yet, and so Dad went to Heels Engineering College, and Mother went to work in a cannery in San Francisco, and we lived in an apartment house that must have had, I guess, 8 apartments in it, and the people not right up above us, but the next floor up above us, were members of the church too, which was pretty unusual in San Francisco in those days. And she was a concert pianist. She practiced all day long, practically. And when I got home from school, my sister wouldn't be home yet, and so I'd go up to Dora Johnson's and listen to her play while I waited for somebody to come home so I could get into the house.
Oh.
And I guess we must have lived there for about a year and a half, something like that. And then in June of 1931, I think, we went to Honolulu. Dad couldn't get back on Mare Island, but he was able to go to work at Pearl Harbor. And the deal was the government would pay your way one way, either to Honolulu or back from Honolulu. And because the Depression was so bad, this veterans from World War I got a bonus, and it was just a little more than enough to move us to Honolulu. And then they had to bring us back. My folks didn't trust banks very much because they had been saving money for my sister's college education in a savings and loan that went bust during, when the Depression hit, when so many banks failed. And so they didn't want to just save their money to come home on, but they had that contract that the government had to bring us back. And it was a good move because we didn't have any more money when we came back, although the wages were better there, prices were higher. At the time, a loaf of bread was a nickel here, and a quart of milk was maybe a dime here. A loaf of bread was a quarter there, and a quart of milk was nearly $1 because they had to ship everything in. They didn't have, there was cattle over on Hawaii, but they were beef cattle mostly, not dairy cattle, and so fresh milk was really quite expensive. It had to be taken over on a ships, and that took a week,
Yeah.
But we had a lot of canned milk.
Oh.
And we learned to like things like the Japanese dry plums, and they call it simoy. And they had sweet simoy and salty simoy. And I just love the sweet simoy, only they call it crack seed, because they crack the seeds and leave the seeds in. And it was really good because you could get a penny's worth. It'd be a little paper bag full, with about this much in the bottom. It'd take you a long time to eat it because you had to keep picking all those seeds out. When we went to Honolulu, my sister had, well, this is a long story. When I was I guess it was when I was just a few months old. I don't know which Christmas it was. But anyhow, Mother couldn't go to town to buy my sister a toy. And so she gave my sister a $5 gold piece and let her go pick out her own doll. And she spent the whole $5 on the doll, which was a really expensive doll in those days. So
How-
when we...
How long would it take you to earn $5 back then?
Oh, whole day. And when we went to Honolulu, I was in 2nd grade, so I guess I was 7, because I was baptized in Hawaii, so I guess I was 7. And my sister was 11, and she thought she was too old to carry the doll, and they wouldn't pack it because they packed everything. When they finally did buy a car, my folks bought and paid cash for a 1929 Model A Ford. And my dad worked for hours figuring out how to pack everything they needed. The washing machine was full of kitchen stuff, and it was in the back seat. And, oh, he got everything in there. And he slid out of the car, and the crane picked it up and put it on the ship. And then we didn't have to take only one trunk and, but clothes and suitcases, but things like a doll had to be carried aboard. They couldn't get packed anywhere. And she wouldn't carry it, so I had to carry it. And then I wasn't allowed to play with it on the ship. Because I was too little, I might break it. And that same doll, the same thing happened coming home from Hawaii. I was given a doll at Christmas time, the first Christmas there. But they gave it away when we came home, and I had to carry my sister's doll. And I still wasn't allowed to carry it. But by then I was 11, or nearly. But I enjoyed being in Hawaii. I could climb trees and pick the fruit and eat it right out of the trees. And it wasn't apples or pears or peaches. It was papaya and mangoes. And, oh, it was great. Only I don't know if you know that I'm allergic to perfume. They have a big kind of a magnolia flower out there they call cup of gold. And it had a pod about this big. The flower, the bud, was a big pod about this big. And I'd heard it when I was climbing up in the tree. And they opened actually with a pop sound. And so one day I got one that was about ready to pop and brought it home, and we put it in a cup of water in my bedroom, and it popped open in the night. And my sister and I were both sick to our stomachs. It was so strong and sweet.
I guess what I brought Grandma for corsage on our first dance day.
Oh, no. One of those things?
Well, a gardenia, and they have the same kind of an odor.
So you guys started out in Utah, and you went to Oregon, and you went to Hawaii, and you ended up in California. So how did you finally meet there in California?
We want to tell you about
One more thing.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
We lived in Oregon, and then they moved to Oregon.
From Hawaii.
Oh.
They were just on the other side of the mountain from us, up there in Oregon. At the same time.
We were in a little burg called St. Helena, on the edges of the Mount St. Helens.
St. Helens, yeah.
And you were where? On the other side of the mountain?
Vernonia.
Vernonia was just on the other side of the mountain. Up to this point, we never met. But I don't know what my dad did. I was too young to really understand. But he had a row with his supervisor on Mare Island. A disagreement. And they fired him. And when he came home, he said, prayerfully, "Thank God I'd have never had the guts to quit, because it was still depression over here. But they had to bring us home." And so we came home on a troop ship. And we were up in the officers' quarters because that was the only place where they could have families. And our biggest entertainment was we were up on a deck, and then down here was another deck, and the troops were doing calisthenics and things down here. And one day one of the guys, the soldiers, got sick and started to throw up, and his drill sergeant or whoever gave him a shove over to the rail so he wouldn't vomit all over the deck, and he went overboard. We spent about 3 or 4 hours going around in a circle till they got him picked up again. And that ship was named the Chateau Theory. It was named after a battle of World War I. And it was not its maiden voyage, it was its last voyage. When they got it back here, they scrapped it.
Oh.
But Dad didn't have a job to go to, and so we had friends out there, of course, a lot of them, and this one man, he was a widower, and he was, I thought, quite old, but I don't know how old he really was, you know. And he told my dad that anytime we came back, if he couldn't find work, if he'd come to his farm that he bought in St. Helena and help him, that he would provide board and room for the family. And so that's where we went. And he lived in an old drafty house, and it was so funny to watch my dad. I saw him do it more than once. We went right from the ship, and of course he'd worked on ships that were in the harbor at Pearl Harbor all the time. And he'd go, we went right up there, and he'd go out and help do the milking. I guess it was the guy sold his milk or something, you know, for a living. And Dad had come in on the back porch, and it wasn't level. And he'd come in with a bucket of milk on each hand and stand there like this, waiting for the ship to right.